2 years into the civil war in Yemen, 80% of the population is now estimated to be in need of humanitarian aid, with aid agencies warning of widespread famine. More than 10,000 civilians have been killed and 3 million people displaced by the fighting between an internationally recognized government and Houthi rebels. The government's backed by Saudi Arabian forces with US intelligence and British hardware. The Houthis have Iranian support. Elisabeth Kendall specializes in Arabic poetry and jihadist culture, and when not teaching students at Oxford, her research takes her to Yemen, this time to the quieter east of the country, but still showing the impact of war.
As my 4x4 pulled away from Oman's desert border post to cross the no-man's land before Yemen, I felt a familiar surge of trepidation. My research trips were becoming ever shorter as the risks became ever greater. Even in eastern Yemen, far from the battlefronts against Houthi rebels in the west, the war is having knock-on effects. I was immediately struck by the clutter of cars and trucks in this usually desolate landscape, lining the road, parked back-to-back on both sides. "What's going on?" I asked the Yemeni tribesman who had picked me up near the border. "Oh, these will all disappear around 2 a.m, they assured me. The night shift was the best time to smuggle vehicles through the border post, they explained. The cars would be sold on in Yemen, while the trucks would be loaded with more merchandise on the Yemeni side and continue on further into the country." "What merchandise?" I asked. "Well, weapons, cash, whatever comes in via the coast," came the reply. "The cargo is hidden beneath boxes of legitimate goods, or more usual contraband, like cigarettes. This smuggling boom is just one more consequence of the war." As we reached Yemen itself, I spotted with relief the familiar convoy of land cruisers, full of volunteer tribesmen who'd be my security escort. The men performed the traditional greeting, "Khabor," rubbing noses, exchanging news and invoking the blessings of Allah. Then everyone hopped into their vehicles to drive 5 minutes down the winding road to a desolate service station. But we weren't there for fuel. This small concrete outpost acts as a sort of valet service for weapons. It's where everyone drops off their guns before crossing into Oman and then picks them up again on the way back. So, armed to the hilt, we bumped along the northern desert route, now punctuated by many more checkpoints than I'd ever seen there. With so many checkpoints, how could the smugglers be so busy, I wondered? The answer soon came. As night fell, we pulled in at another checkpoint to warm up over an open fire with the guards and share cups of tea, freshly brewed over the flames. Wrapped up in a blanket against the cold desert chill, I listened to their news and complaints. "The authorities get angry if we try to search the vehicles," confided one. "They threatened to stop our salaries," added another. With such vested interests getting rich from the war, what hope for peace? Yet these men told me they still hoped their children might enjoy a better future. They were looking for teachers who might give their children the skills to find alternative livelihoods away from the smugglers and the armed militant groups. The tribesmen decided we should overnight in a desert village, safer than staying in a town. So we veered off-road, bouncing at speed between rocky outcrops and perilous cliff edges, dimly perceptible in the starry night. By the small hours, I could make out some flickering lights. We drew to a halt by a large tent, and the men yelled into the darkness. An aging camel herder appeared, bearing a huge tin bowl brimming with thick liquid. "Camel's milk." "Drink, drink," he insisted. Camel's milk both sates the hunger and quenches the thirst, and I tucked in enthusiastically. In traditional style, the bowl was passed from hand to hand until all had drunk. After daybreak, I found a huge black pot bubbling away on the open fire. As the men performed the morning prayer, I wandered around the ramshackle village, watching children play in the sand and spotting a freshly severed goat's head on a nearby wall. That, at least, explained what was in the pot. I thought how sad it was that this impoverished corner of Yemen could now be considered lucky. Lucky to be avoiding the bombing, fighting and famine plaguing the rest. Back in the compound, the men were drinking tea and talking animatedly about politics. They had many questions for me, and I was shocked by how broad their horizons had become. On my first visit to these deserts, almost 5 years earlier, they had spoken about Yemen itself as though it were a distant foreign country. Now they were asking me what I thought about the oppression of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar and the anti-Muslim campaign promises of Donald Trump. What had changed? Facebook, WhatsApp, they laughed as they whipped out their new smartphones. Of course, there was no signal in this remote wilderness, but when, a few hours later, we re-emerged from the deserts onto the metalled road towards the coastal capital of Al Ghaida, the cacophony of pinging phones in my Land Cruiser sounded the changing times.
Elisabeth Kendall.